Hi, and welcome to the Belly to Belly podcast. And this episode, I'm really looking forward to. This is a topic that we see quite a bit, and it's all around the difference between being nimble and random in your internationalization strategy. And we're privileged today to welcome Karina Sotnik from WorldUpstart to help us to kind of dive into this topic. Welcome, Karina.
Thank you so much, Bill. I'm looking forward to this conversation as well. It's near and dear to my heart.
Well, let's dive into it. So when you think about, companies that you work with and that you've worked with over time that are either nimble or random or both, what kinds of things come to mind for you as you sort of think about this topic?
Yeah, so, I worked over a decade on and off with helping companies come to different markets. And I see that a lot of companies just take a really opportunistic approach. They might be successful where they are. They start enjoying success in revenue, maybe in sort of scaling up their companies. Maybe they're well-established companies that have been in their country for 20 plus years. And they suddenly had a really good conversation with someone from US at the trade show, right? Or they might even have a first client in the US. And that usually triggers this, oh, there's a big market, let me try to expand. And so without any sort of strategy or any preparedness, they dive in, and we see not great results from that because US market is big and desirable, but really difficult, as we know, in almost any industry. I cannot think of industry where it would be easy. And so to have a fleshed out strategy, this becomes really important if you really want to scale here and not just have one more client to your belt.
Yeah, so what you just talked about is sort of the random approach where you just sort of are drawn in and you're looking at the shiny objects and you say, oh, there's an interesting opportunity, let's go there. And then the next week you see another opportunity over here and you just go, yeah.
Right, and the client that you might get first might not even be the client that you will end up serving in a larger scale in the US. So having strategy, and you can still be very nimble, but having strategy in what I called 4 buckets is really important. You need to have your legal strategy. How do you incorporate it will affect you later, right? How do you bring people here from your country that has know-how? It will affect you later. How do you deal with your IP, right? All of this falls into this legal bucket. And then your industry-specific bucket, you really need to have a strategy on regulatory, and we can talk a little bit about it later. But without that strategy, oh my God, you can lose that one client pretty quickly, and you cannot obtain others. And the thing to understand about US when it comes, for example, to regulatory is it's not one country. It's 50 different countries, right? And when it comes to packaging, when it comes to taxes, when it comes to regulatory, I deal a lot with medtech companies. When it comes to telemedicine, there's still many states that don't allow it legally, right? So understanding that you're dealing with 50 different regulations is important in your strategy. And then the third bucket is operations, and that falls into how do you hire people here, because there's so many mistakes in not bringing the right team to actually execute on that nimble strategy, right? And finally, a lot of companies think that they're not going to fundraise in the US. They have revenue in where they are, and they just like naturally will expand to US. And then they understand that expansion actually is expensive. And so most of the companies that I deal with ended up trying to fundraise in the US, or companies come here thinking that money will flow because US is so incredibly welcoming and rich. And that's just not the case. Fundraising is difficult no matter where you are, but it's very difficult in the US because you face really stiff competition with so many other companies coming from all over the world. So these are the 4 buckets that companies need to think about, and they can be very nimble in each, but they need to address all 4.
So I have legal, regulatory, operations, funding. Where does sales fit in?
Oh, that's a really good question. So I think sales fit into operations when you start thinking who to hire and who is going to be in your team. And there you have your sales, your marketing, your people that know your product from your own country, plus people who know US market from this country. Plus, I always tell people to start thinking of adding to their advisory board with local key opinion leaders because they can open doors. So it has to be a comprehensive strategy, not just hiring one US person and hoping that that person will bring sales. That never happens. It might be one client, but in a larger scheme of things, you really need a combination. You need a team. And more often than not, the senior management person needs to be here at least for first few years in order for the company to succeed. So thinking how to do that while you still have your company in your own home country, it's all part of strategy. Yeah.
Right. So what would be a strategy, or what would a strategy look like that would allow a company to be nimble, and nimble being the ability to adapt quickly, to learn quickly, and to evolve their business model to best advantage themselves in the new market with the new client and client type or buyer persona. But how would you develop a strategy that was particularly focused on helping a company be nimble?
Yeah. So again, keeping in mind that you really need to address all four buckets. But what I would say, you don't need one expensive consultant. And sorry to all the consultants around we are all consultants, but I see companies making mistake of hiring one person hoping to hit all the check boxes. It doesn't work like that. So bringing in the right expertise at the time when it's needed, I think it's really important and will be nimble at the end. But also just thinking thinking through what is the end goal, right? The end goal is not just to have first client. The end goal has to be bigger. And so thinking through all the checkpoints, when to bring right people, who these people are, where to find them, all of this will sort of create this lean strategy for the company at the end. And then understanding that what they budgeted for the expansion needs to be doubled, because everyone underestimates in terms of time and in terms of budgets how expensive it is to come to US. And if you don't think that you need to fundraise in the US, you will end up fundraising in the US. So you need to create that strategy as well. So yeah, to me, these are the most important components. Again, not just to dive in, but to really take time to create strategy and understanding what elements this strategy has to contain. We will talk a little bit later of what my company does, but basically we uncover what companies don't know that they don't know. So understanding what is it that you don't know in order to be successful becomes sort of like a hunt that is probably the most important.
That's great. Just a editorial note, your microphone, you're moving around and it's causing some...
Yes, my microphone is right here and I thought it was right here. Thank you.
No, that's better.
Yeah, good. Sorry.
Good. No. So let's maybe advance a little bit to when you are nimble, when you have a nimble strategy, what changes? What evolves for the company that wouldn't be there if they didn't have a nimble strategy?
Yeah, and I think part of the strategy has to be openness to receive recommendations, to receive help, right? We see so many CEOs, so many heads of companies coming here kind of cocky, if I can say that, kind of, we're successful where we are. Who are you to tell us what to do? And we see them burning because of that. So I think companies need to be open to receive the qualified help that they need along the way. May it be a good lawyer or a good immigration lawyer or a good accountant or investor who freely gives advice. That becomes really important. So yeah, I think being open to that, being open to bring people to be advisors, and getting help and getting the right advisors from the right industry, and also understanding that your strategy that you might think might not fit into US market at all, right? I see a lot of companies coming from smaller countries. You can find very few countries that are as big as US, right? So the majority of companies come here from much smaller countries, and the strategy that worked for them there might not work here at all. Their product might not fit the problem that they're trying to solve here. The problem in the US could be completely different than what they're solving in France or Germany or elsewhere or in Asian countries. So being nimble also means being flexible and being open to pivot if you need to pivot. And I think that's the key to success of the companies here. Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah, you hit on something really interesting, and we see it on the sales and marketing side quite a bit. And ego is important, right? We wouldn't, leave our bed in the morning. We wouldn't start businesses, and we certainly wouldn't cross borders with our business without having a certain amount of ego and confidence and all that. But it's dangerous at sort of an excess when whether it's don't listen to our advisors, we don't listen to our team, we don't listen to our customers, we make some challenging assumptions. And there have been some entrepreneurs that have been successful with uber egos. Steve Jobs comes to mind, but there are very few Steve Jobs. Most of us don't have that capability to anticipate markets like Steve and others did. But I guess when you think about being nimble, and I'm thinking specifically about sales and marketing strategy now, but my sense is it would also, although it's not my expertise, would also apply to a variety of other buckets in the process. But in sales and marketing, we do A/B testing. We have hypotheses and we A/B test certain things, and we use that as our guide in order to develop strategy. Because the challenge we see quite often is that we collectively with our clients can get very narrow in our focus in terms of sort of accepting one person's hypotheses or another, and ultimately the only hypothesis that matters is the market. And so what are your thoughts around nimble strategies as relates to doing things like A/B testing when you talk about marketing and whatnot, versus sort of let's do what worked in our home country and sort of go down that road and really invest in that? Do you have thoughts about that?
I do. I think in sales and marketing, no matter what the strategy, I think the most important sort of component, and you probably will agree, is the passion that comes through when you're doing your sales pitch. But what I also see is that sometimes, so companies coming from smaller markets sometimes need to be sort of going after many sources of revenue because it's a small market and they need to develop many different sales pitch for many different clients. What my advice will be, again, being nimble and focused, is to figure out who is your client in the US. And sometimes it might not even be the client that you serve in your own home country, right? And so doing that A/B marketing and figuring out who is that first client that you need to focus on, and then really focus. It's good to have down the road this sort of platform approach with multiple verticals that you will go after later. but to have that zero focus and to bring your passion with also understanding that the product market fit might change here. And that leads me to, yes, you need to have your ego to be successful as an entrepreneur, but you also absolutely have to be nimble and flexible. And that flexibility, I think, is the key component to being successful here. You will fail, you will need to pivot. And Steve Jobs failed many times, right? Until you find that one kernel that will give the roots to a beautiful tree. So to be very metaphorical here.
Yeah, but that idea of listening, and whether it's, to your point, advisors or to markets or early customers, all of that. So I want to go back to a comment you made, kind of a last question before we talk about WorldUpstart, and that is, you talked about kind of the key resources, time and money, and obviously there's lots of attention that gets paid to money. People talk about fundraising in the U.S. and so on, but let's talk about time, because in time obviously is how much time do we have. But one of the things that I see, and I'd love your thoughts about it, is not really as much appreciation about how actually little time you have. So when you think about the idea that companies coming in to any country have put together, whether it's a team, they've put together advisors, maybe funders, salespeople, just a whole myriad of resources that they brought together. And that group, their attention is generally short, right? You're going to compete for salespeople. If they don't see early success, they're going to go somewhere else. Your funders, obviously, they need a return within a certain amount of time. There are all these constituents that have sort of a short window. And there's obviously a lot of ways to address this. Some companies come in and they look for big wins early. Others come in and look more for sort of base hits or small wins and build on that to sort of build team confidence, test operations, and so on. But when you think about the time component of market entry, how do you advise companies to sort of make sure that they leverage sort of that time and don't let the sand run out of the hourglass before the other resources sort of evaporate? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, and that's why strategy is important, not just diving in, but really putting strategy together. It might depend a little bit where the company is, where it's a well-established company or still an early stage company. But a lot of companies who come to US essentially are startups. No matter if you are a 20, 30-year-old company, if you come here, you are a startup and you need to think as a startup and you need to understand your runway in terms of the budget, how long you can sustain that startup operation until how long the parent company can support it. What are the most important milestones where that you hit so that you can continue the operation? A lot of companies have a couple of false starts until they learn their lesson, right? And then put the strategy together. And just like with a startup, the runway, the golden standard is you need to have a runway of at least 18 months before you will start fundraising again for your next milestone. So I would say, give yourself 2-3 years to really see where you are. But again, be nimble and flexible so that if you need to pivot, you pivot. If you need to fold and restart, it's cheaper and more efficient to do that than to keep pushing to the dead end, right? So I think the key word, as you said, is nimble and agile. And so, but also not just, and focused. I would say nimble, agile, and focused would be the 3 elements in terms of what are the most important. But I also want to say one more thing. I think a lot of companies that we see completely underestimate their competition. And I think that fits into, one of the buckets, I'm sure, maybe in all of the buckets. it's just this, again, this cockiness that, we know our competition, we dismiss our competition, we're so much better. Of course, we will be successful here because we do Y and Z. And I see it biting companies a lot. It's biting companies in fundraising, it's biting them in sales. If they don't respect their competition and give it due respect, and also don't understand what is the value benefit that they bring to the customer that is better than their competition. I think that's a really key position that the companies need to understand. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. We see that as a challenge quite often as well. And even to the extent where there are competitors ahead, using those references in terms of, how did they get there? What are their how is their messaging compared to yours and all that? Yeah, lots of really great lessons from competitors. Well, and also probably some good validation as well that, there is a market opportunity and, and all that. So, yeah.
The biggest red flag to me and to a lot of investors is if you say there's no competition. Oh my God, I throw my hands up. I'm like, well, then you don't have a market, or you need to invent your market. Like, why even bother? Yeah. You always have
a very expensive market to enter.
Yeah,
exactly.
The way it's done.
So let's talk.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, let's talk about your work in WorldUpstart and what you're doing to help companies internationalize. I'd love to hear more about it.
Yeah, so we're zero focused on helping companies enter United States market. And right now we're zero focused on medtech and life sciences and medical devices, digital health. So we run accelerators 3-4 times a year, where we sort of hit all 4 buckets. We organized our accelerator where we have we address legal issues with experts. We bring in experts to talk about how you should incorporate in the US and why. And we have very small cohorts so that companies can get expert advice almost on a one-on-one basis. We talk about, immigration strategies. There are 11 different ways you can get visa, why this particular way is important for you in the long run. We talk about IP protection. So many companies think that they will have their IP in Belgium, but will fundraise in the US. Well, no one will invest into sales and marketing. So how do you license IP to US entity? So we do all of that. Then we concentrate on healthcare market specifically, the reimbursement strategy. My God, if you don't have reimbursement strategy coming to US, how are you going to survive here? So understanding how US healthcare is so fundamentally different from other countries and how to approach it. Regulatory, obviously, but also how to market to patients, providers, and payers. We have companies here that sell directly to doctors and surgeons in their own countries. Well, that will never happen here. So how do you hone the strategies to do it here? And then operations, how to hire, where to find talent, how to do international banking, which is so not trivial, moving money across borders these days. And then finally, fundraising. US investors are spoiled and like to see things in a very specific way. And we train companies how to do it. And then we put them in front of the investors. And they work weekly with experts from the industry, with mentors. So that's sort of the comprehensive program that we bring to the table to companies that are open and ready to enter market. And our mission is to uncover for them, again, what they don't know, that they don't know. So by the end of it, they have a roadmap and they can start hiring the right consultants to help them with specific tasks that they need to do. And so that's why a lot of our mentors are also consultants that can pick up the pieces and run with them. So that's what WorldUpstart is focusing on. As I said in the past, we've really been focused on healthcare. This year, we're also thinking of adding a vertical, and that probably will be fintech or smart city. So one of the technology verticals to run accelerator for those companies. So that's what we do.
Yeah, that's great. So is there, obviously, med device and life science is a big space. And companies are all different stages. Is there a profile of company that is particularly relevant to and particularly valued in the WorldUpstart accelerator?
Yeah. We always say that we work with companies that have proven traction in their own country. And sometimes that proven traction could be well-funded company. The investors believe in that, because in life science, you might not have revenue for 7-10 years, right? Sometimes the traction is revenue. And you don't have to be an old established company to come to us. You could be a startup, but you need to have some proof of product market fit in your own country before you come here. A lot of startups coming from smaller countries have to look at US as their big market, but I always advise companies to test all the hypotheses and product market fit and validation where they are, where they know people before they come to us. So that's the only, I would say, criteria. We don't take equity in the companies yet. We take a pretty small fee for our accelerator. And I just want to give you statistics. So in 2 years, 39 companies, actually we're close to 45 right now, but I keep saying 39 because we're not done with the latest cohort, went through us, and 15 of them are now in the United States, and that's just in 2 years. Establishing, growing, 4 are FDA approved. So I think our method works for them to be successful. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. Really, really great news. Well, this has been fantastic, Karina. We'll certainly put your contact info and website, whatnot, in the description. Do you have an ongoing application process, or so people can apply anytime and get into the program?
It's ongoing, and application is open right now, but our next cohort starts on January 17th, which is pretty soon. And we have few slots available right now. So if anyone is wanting to start the new year right, we welcome them. It's fully online. It's 6 weeks, pretty intense online accelerator. You will meet with experts twice a week for 1.5 hours, and then with mentor once a week for 1 hour. So it's 4 hours weekly for 6 weeks, but you will get so much out of it. And by the end, you will have your strategy laid out. So I welcome companies to apply. We will have another accelerator probably later in the spring, but I think our January one is gelling to be a really interesting one with very interesting companies right now. So yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. Great. Well, cool. This has been so nice. And thank you for taking the time today to talk to us about being nimble versus random, because it's such a, I think you used the term focus, which, likewise, I would put that at the top of the list. But this is certainly this notion that there's a big difference between being nimble and being random. So it's great to talk through the topic with you today.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me. This was fun. And this topic is so near and dear to my heart, because just like you, we see the mistakes that could have been avoided. And if we can preventively do it, I'm happy to talk about it every day. Yes.
Fantastic. Well, we'll invite you back to talk more about this and other topics as we go forward. But again, thank you for taking the time.
Thank you, Bill, so much. Much appreciated.